Welcome to the Codcast from Commonwealth Magazine. I'm Michael Jonas, and I'm here with my Commonwealth colleagues Bruce Moll and Jack Sullivan for a special pre-primary installment of the Codcast. How are you guys doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Michael.
All right,
good
Jack.
too.
Good, Bruce. So a lot of political energy has been unleashed by Donald Trump's election 2 years ago. And nationally, the Democrats are hoping that's going to translate into big gains in the midterm congressional elections with the hope of taking back control of the House. Yet here in Massachusetts, where the Democrats already hold the overwhelming share of elected offices, we're seeing that energy and the appetite for change play out within Democratic primaries, with several longtime incumbents facing serious challengers for the first time in years. And two of the most prominent races certainly are the 7th Congressional District race, where 20-year incumbent Michael Capauno is being challenged by Boston City Councilor Ayanna Pressley, and in the race for Secretary of State, where Bill Galvin, 24-year incumbent, is facing another Boston City Councilor, Josh Zakim. Bruce, what do you think is going on here with folks, pouncing on candidates who've been in office for a long time, Democrats in an overwhelmingly Democratic state, who are now kind of both running scared?
It seems to me, in a sort of offhand summary, if you will, these incumbents are being tied in with this, caught up in this need for change. And because, as you say, Democrats control pretty much everything here, there's the throw the bums out mentality. And I don't personally know if it works for me, because
you like the bums, right?
in some ways I like the bums, but at the same time, in both of the races, it doesn't appear there's huge differences in the outlook politically, political stances of the candidates. So you're really sort of saying to me, the voter, vote for me, you want change, or vote for me, I look more like you, something like that. And I don't know if that works. I think there is a restlessness to do something, but I'm not sure. I'm there.
I'm not sure though that it is all that new. I think the machinations behind it this year are new, given what's happening, like you said, about Trump, and this idea that the younger generation just doesn't want to wait anymore. But I think there's always been this undercurrent of we need term limits because you got career politicians, and I think that's part of what's driving it. But I also, in one area, I disagree with Bruce as far as the not a lot of difference as far as the politics goes. I think with the Secretary of State's office, you are seeing a major difference, and it's not so much politics, because politics doesn't necessarily play a role in what a Secretary of State is supposed to do, although clearly Josh Zakim is making politics a part of the race. But I think that there's a huge difference on the way that they look at the operation of the office and what the responsibilities of the office are doing, and how much more assertive Zakim thinks that the office should be, and the way he will take it, versus Galvin, who he has, and I think a lot of people would look at it that way, as somebody who has been pulled along by changes rather than really affected them on his own.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I hear what you're saying about there's always been this kind of undercurrent of restlessness, or some talk about term limits. But I mean, to be honest, that's really been in this state sort of a minority view, and it's been a long time since we saw those issues really play out. I'm sort of thinking back to the 80s, when you had Jerry Williams on the radio and the kind of talk radio scene that was really thumping that drum. And even though there's some folks who have that view, still most incumbents don't really get thrown out. And I was struck by, there's been a lot of pieces written in the national press about the Capauno and Pressley race, and I was struck by one that I read recently that made the remark that, talking about Capauno, that in looking at the race, he hasn't really committed a fireable offense, they said, yet he's in a real tough race. And it struck me that you could sort of say the same about Galvin, and that in general, incumbents do need to sort of commit some kind of a fireable offense before they're thrown out. I mean, the benefit of the doubt goes to those who are in power. And I think that's Capuano. Probably he's up there saying, what did I do wrong, guys? Because there really isn't a fireable offense you can point to, but this change feel is in the air nonetheless.
I think part of it, though, with Capuano, and I think Pressley is pushing it, is that Capuano represents this static leadership thought process that's in there. He's not. It's not so much that it's about Capuano, but it's about Capuano and Pelosi and the rest of the Democratic leadership. And I think that's kind of what she's pushing, is that you've got this you've got this group of people in there who are making policies who, in sort of a patriarchal way, that they think is good for us. And I think that's the argument that she's making. And I think to an extent, I think it's resonating.
Well, I choose to differ with Jack on this one. I've gotten quite a few mailers from Pressley, and I don't think she's saying that Congress needs to change. I think she's saying, I'm going to be more like you, the people that are in this district. I'm black. I'm a woman. It's our time. It's our time to get in, and we need to see, the legislature, the Congress needs to see things through our lens. That's why we're needed.
Whatever that is, right? I mean, she hasn't really been railing as an outsider. I mean, she was a Hillary Clinton backer. She was not trying to. She was not part of our revolution with Bernie Sanders. So she's been part of the power. Associated with the Democratic insiders, working for John Kerry, working for former Congressman Joe Kennedy. So.
And Zakim, I take your point about Zakim has a different philosophy, but I think he's a Boston City councilor. This is his first attempt at a statewide race, and I think he's grabbing at all sorts of things. He may be pushing Galvin to do more, which is a great thing. That's what elections are all about. But I don't know that. I think the most dramatic thing is, what did you say? Galvin's been in office for 24 years.
Right.
And I noticed, I was on the website the other day, and the picture they have of Galvin there is incredibly young-looking Bill Galvin. When you see him on the street, he's not incredibly young-looking anymore. And then you have a challenger who is incredibly young-looking, almost looks like a tyke next to Galvin.
He was a tyke when Galvin was first elected. So.
Exactly. So I think that is a major theme as well there, that I'm young, it's our time, throw the old guys out.
Generational, in a way.
Yeah, and I think that goes across both. I think you're right. I think it goes across as well as with the Capuano and Pressley race. You're talking, somebody who's been there 20 years, who's, he qualifies for Social Security. Well, he doesn't because he's a congressman, but he's in that Social Security age range where she is, in her mid-40s and representing this new wave, this new generation. And I think that is part of the theme as well that Michael was talking about earlier, that, this is our time.
The ironic thing, too, about the congressional race is that Capuano hasn't made a big deal out of it, but he's played it up, that if this Democratic unrest succeeds in returning the House to Democratic control, Capuano and the rest of the congressional delegation would move up and gain positions of power. Now, Capuano is not going to be a Richie Neal, head of the Ways and Means Committee, but he's going to move up and be more powerful than Ayanna Pressley would. And basically, Pressley's answer to that is, who cares? It's time to get rid of him. And that's where I know you should vote for the person and vote for the thing, but you also sort of think, who would be more valuable in Washington? It's a tough question.
Well, I think that's also an argument that would resonate generationally, because you're talking an older segment of the voters who remember when Tip O'Neill and Joe Moakley wielded their clout in Congress, and Ted Kennedy, so they understand what clout can do. But it's been a while since we've had somebody in those positions, so the younger generation may be in line with what Pressley is saying, which is, who cares? What does it mean for us? Because they don't see the benefits to it.
And the other last thing I'll say, I'm just sort of struck by this sort of talk of change, and that it's not necessarily ideologically driven. And the sort of point that underscores that is the Boston Herald editorial page, which I've been following closely in recent months, just kind of fascinated by the clear sort of turn to the right it's taken under the new editor there, Tom Shattuck. That page has endorsed both Pressley and Zakim in these races. So this sort of talk of change is going even to the sort of conservative of the two Boston daily papers. And I don't know, are they just trying to sort of stir up trouble
Yeah,
and
I mean,
cause
that would be
cause
my
problems
question,
for Democrats?
I
They
mean-
also endorsed Massey in the Democratic primary for governor, who most people sort of see as the underdog in that race. So.
And the far left of the two candidates as well. So it does bring up a question. What is the actual reason behind the endorsements?
Right. I mean, with the governor's race, maybe they're trying to get Baker a softer target or an easier target in their mind. But in the others, I mean, the Democrats are going to carry the day and be elected. So whatever their intentions, they're calling for new, fresh blood in those offices to be held by Democrats who then, presumably, back to our theme of how entrenched they are, they will go on to have long reigns there. So it's just an interesting wrinkle. So sort of let's just continue a little bit with this theme on outsiders, and in particular, this is playing out in a few legislative races, and in particular, a couple of Boston House races that have caught my attention are the race that Jamaica Plain State Rep Jeff Sanchez is in, where he's facing a strong challenge from Nika Elugardo, and then Byron Rushing, veteran lawmaker from the South End, is facing a slew of challengers, but one in particular, John Santiago, who's a emergency room doctor, has been endorsed by a couple of progressive political groups in Massachusetts. Elugardo, who's challenging Sanchez, has also picked up the backing of a number of progressive groups. And I just find this fascinating that in both cases you have, pretty liberal-leaning lawmakers, both minority lawmakers. Sanchez, the son of Puerto Rican parents, and Byron Rushing, African-American lawmaker. And they're both in leadership positions in the House, which you would think would bring sort of clout to the issues that they support, and their backers would be cheered by their rise. But instead, it seems like their rise in the House is kind of part of what's causing trouble for them, with the challengers saying that they're overly tied to this kind of calcified, top-heavy power structure in the House.
I think, in the words of Tom Menino, Bob DeLeo is an Alcatraz around their necks. He.
There you go.
I think it comes back to that again, clout. What does clout mean, and who does it mean it to? And in the definition, I think, of younger voters, of these outsiders, clout means that you're entrenched in the that cabal that's running the legislature. And I think that it becomes a pejorative for people because, and we've talked about this before, off microphone, as they say, that what they bring to it, what they're doing, isn't so much bringing their values. In the case of Jeff Sanchez, bringing his progressive values to bear on the way that the budget is formulated, as much as he's carrying the water for Bob DeLeo. At least that's the perception, and I think that's what's weighing him down, and that's what's bringing the challenges out.
So just a little context to this. I went back and looked at a recent story I did, and how unusual it is for someone to challenge an incumbent in the state legislature. I counted 25 races. That's out of 200. 25, 22 in the House and 3 in the Senate, where no incumbent is running. And so that's where you have a sort of wide open race. But in 78% of the 200 candidates running, face no opposition in the primary. And so in most cases, that's a Democrat is an incumbent is going to cruise through the primary and then probably face a Republican. If they face a Republican, over half don't even face a challenger in the final. So it's a very rare thing. And I think so. The issue you're bringing up is that these people in leadership who may have, quote unquote, disappointed some of their followers by not being more of a firebrand for the issues once they are inside the circle of power. It's a fascinating debate, really, because you get power in the legislature by moving up through the ranks almost like at a corporation. And so you become part of that, a cog in the machine, if you will. And you don't get to the top as an independent who just does whatever they want. So you're criticizing people for being part of a system, really. And I don't know the answer to that. Because I think if you ask Byron Rushing or Jeff Sanchez, they say they do bring their values to their job.
Absolutely.
The question is whether they, when push comes to shove, can they just tell everyone to screw, I'm going to do what I want to do? And again, probably they can't and get anything done. So it's a fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's where it comes down to. Again, I'm not saying that Jeff Sanchez doesn't, tout his progressive ideals. It's the perception, because when you see a budget come out, you say this is Bob DeLeo's budget. And I think everybody agrees this is Bob DeLeo's budget. Maybe not so much, under Brian Dempsey. But Dempsey and DeLeo were much more ideologically in tune, I think, than Sanchez and DeLeo were. But I think that you see it now, and I think you saw it also when Sanchez was chairing the Health Finance Committee, that a lot of the issues that came out or didn't come out of that committee were tied to what DeLeo wanted. And I think that that's what opens them up to criticism. And again, it's perception as much as it is reality. I think you're right that there's a certain format that you have to follow to be able to gain that power. But I think the perception is that you've compromised yourself too much to get there.
Michael, do you think you've written about the two races? Is it an accident or just a freak that Sanchez is from JP and Rushing is from the South End, both very liberal areas? Is it that anger we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I think it. I mean, I don't think they'd be facing this kind of challenge in sort of more moderate leaning districts. I think there's a disconnect between the political leanings of their districts and, in particular, what is seen as the kind of more centrist to conservative leanings of the House that they're part of. But it's not just that they're part of a House where they've, could say, I've been trying to push against it. They're seen as part of the problem, in a sense, by extension, by being part of that top echelon of DeLeo's leadership. And Elogardo, she's spun off a few pretty good lines when she's asked about Sanchez, having power, and isn't that good for the district, and we shouldn't throw that out. She says, well, I think what he has is permission, not power. In other words, he has, as much power as DeLeo gives him permission to run with, but ultimately he's not really making the calls. One other thing that I was just sort of struck by is I've noticed that in neither case has DeLeo been particularly involved in their races, and I think that is telling and frankly probably smart politics. I mean, I think if they're asked, they would both, I'm sure, say good things about him and his leadership, but I don't see that either of them is playing up their close ties to him or using him in literature. I mean, sometimes you'd want a picture of yourself with the speaker. That sounds like a pretty
I think
good.
it's been a lot of years since somebody's
a good
wanted that
selling
picture
point
with the speaker.
Well, I mean, the one thing I was reminded of, and this goes back some years, but when Tom Finneran was speaker, I always remember, again, he went around and was trying to be helpful as he could to his members, as he would say it, and he did a fundraiser in Brookline with a woman who was the rep at the time named Ronnie Sidney, and that was her last term in office. She was defeated the next year by, this is sort of, we're dating myself, by Frank Smizek, threw her out. And now he's himself been in there for a long time. He's leaving this year, retiring after being in the legislature. But Smizek basically ran a campaign against her that just tied her to Finneran at a time when Finneran was, kind of the boogeyman among liberals in the state.
It's interesting, too, just like our earlier discussion about Capauno with a lot of experience in the House, and if the House flips Democratic, how his power and the cloud of Massachusetts would increase. In both those races, the two gentlemen that are being challenged are at the very top of House leadership. So if you bring in a newcomer into the system, you have no say, no clout at all. And I would think it's even less than in Congress, probably. So again, for the voter, it's an equation that is, do you throw the guy out because he didn't live up to all the principles that you want, and go with someone who will have no clout to do anything? And it's a very tough choice for a voter if you're mad, but can you get anything? It seems like we're, again, talking about the system on Beacon Hill. A lot of unrest about that. The few people that are challenging incumbents, that's what's driving them.
Right. And there's also been, just in the last few days, a slate of women challengers that have come out and sort of said they're all pledging together that they're going to pledge to stand up and demand more roll call votes, more transparency, essentially, the sort of, age-old call to sort of open up the House, in a way that is not how it operates now, as this kind of closed system. And so again, I think it's interesting that up until now, this kind of unrest and the sort of hostility that's kind of, I think, been produced by Trump's election hasn't really seemed to hit the legislature. And it's sort of interesting that, the legislature, even under DeLeo, is seen as kind of pushing a lot of progressive measures, and DeLeo even formed what they call it. The shorthand has been the Trump Committee, to keep an eye on Trump and all the horrors he's going to bring.
Which hasn't met yet, has it?
Yeah, there's been some question about what it's doing, and again, whether that's more of a figurehead. But I think that you can sort of draw a line and say that in some ways that sort of antipathy toward what's happened in Washington is kind of making its way, toward Beacon Hill. It's not clear whether this little effort by these challengers, or this slate of challengers, or these individual challenges to these leadership figures is going to lead to any change. Obviously, if either Sanchez or Rushing are defeated, that's going to be, that'll be pretty big news, and certainly going to be noticed on Beacon Hill.
I concur.
Well, with that, we've run out of things to fight about.
We haven't talked about the Woo Sox yet, Jack.
Thank God.
For our listeners, Jack is not a fan of the Woo Sox name.
I absolutely will go on record of that controversial stance. I do not like the Woo Sox.
Would you like Woo Woo Sox?
Well, I think that was, we're going to reserve an entire episode of the podcast to have that one out, because I just don't think in a few minutes we can really get to the bottom of that question.
For anybody who is running for office, I will put this out. If you call them Woo Sox, you will not get my vote.
Well, and with that, we hope that whoever you're voting for, that everybody does get out on September 4th for the primary, and we will check in and sort of see where all this lands after the election. But for now, this has been another installment of the podcast from Commonwealth Magazine. For my colleagues Bruce Moll and Jack Sullivan, I'm Michael Jonas. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.